StraightallDay.com.
Dre Baldwin, Work on Your Game, University.com. Topic of this video is raising the floor. And this one, I didn't come up with this topic completely on my own, but I'm going to expound on it on my own. Because this came from, I was talking to my guy Chaz Wilson. He has this thing called Impact Day, and I was speaking at his event. And at the end of his event, he was talking to his audience, and one of the things that he mentioned came from this book by this guy named Benjamin Hardy. Y'all should be familiar with Ben because he wrote a couple of really good books. His most recent one, as of this recording, is called 10X is Easier Than 2X. It's a really good book for any of you who's in business, especially if you're in business for yourself and you want to go to a higher level. That book is all about how to do that and how it's actually easier to go to much higher levels than it is to make marginal improvements. So go get that book if you haven't read it. Anyway, Chaz was sharing something that he heard Ben say in a conversation. And that's what I want to talk about. And the concept is all about raising the floor. So now I'm out of talking about what they said. Now I'm telling you what I said. Many times when we want to go to a higher level, what's the first thing most of us do? Well, not the first thing. First thing most of us do is think about what do we got to do. And we start thinking about the effort and the output that we have to come up with in order to do so. And then the next thing is we start setting maybe bigger goals and putting ourselves up to higher levels of accomplishment. So, for example, if you had a goal of earning $100,000 a year, you might decide, okay, I want to make more money. So now you'll set a goal of, let's say, 10x. I'll set a goal of making $1 million a year instead of 100,000. Now my goal is $1 million. So what you've done is effectively, if you think about it, what you've done is raise the ceiling. You've raised the roof rather than raising the floor. You raise the ceiling by saying, okay, instead of 100,000 as the top, I'm going to make $1 million the top, or 10 million or 100 million, whatever number you want to come up with, doesn't matter. What the concept of raising the floor is about is instead of thinking about how do I raise the upper limit of what I can do, instead raise the lower limit of what you can do. So instead of setting a ceiling of $1 million, instead, what if you set a floor of $1 million, saying that I'm not going to earn anything less than $1 million. Now, first thing you may be thinking to yourself is, well, isn't that just semantics? I mean, you're just changing the verbiage. Is that really changing the situation? Well, if you stop at just words, then you're right. You're not changing anything except changing the words. But you do more than that, because if I set a floor and say I'm not earning less than $1 million, well, that requires some follow-up questions. Let's say I earned $100,000 last year, but I want to earn $1 million as a baseline this year, meaning nothing less than $1 million is acceptable. Well, I got to ask myself some tough questions, because if I did 100,000 last year and $1 million this year, first of all, I can't just work 10 times harder. I can't. If you're already working at a pretty high capacity and you're doing pretty well for yourself, and most people who are looking for personal and professional development are usually pretty much doing a lot already. So you can't work 10 times harder unless you're only doing 10% of what you're capable of already. That's the only way you can do 10 times more. You're working at 80%, you can't do 80% times 10. You only got 100% to choose from. And you can't just work 10 times more. So if you're already working 8-hour days, okay, maybe you go up to 12 hours, maybe you go up to 15, but you can't do 10x more. If you're working 8-hour days, there's no such thing as an 80-hour day. So you can't put in 10 times more time. That's mathematically and biologically impossible. So in order for me to make 10 times more money as a baseline, nothing less is acceptable, I got to ask myself some tough questions, such as what activities or what things are going to allow me to make that much money, given that I have limits of effort, I have a limit of time, I have a limit of intelligence, because you're not going to get 10 times smarter, and I have a limit of maybe what tools or resources I have access to in order to do this. Tools and resources meaning my own abilities. And maybe the customers I'm selling to, maybe the products that I'm selling, the prices that I'm selling at. You got to ask yourself a whole bunch of really tough questions that will require, here's the key, it's going to require you to drop some things that will not allow you, that are not commensurate with you getting to that $1 million level from $100,000. You can't get to there by doing more of the same stuff that you're already doing. You just can't do it. And there are a few things probably out of the things you did to get to 100,000 that helped you get there, that if you did more of those, you can see that multiplying. Given your limits, given your physical limitations, you can possibly get there if you just did more of those things. Let's say you had one client, for example, last year who paid you $25,000. And then you made the rest all by smaller transactions that added up to 75K. Add the 75 to the 25, you get to $100,000. All right, so those smaller transactions that were all $100 a piece that added up to 75K, there's only so many of those that you can do, unless you figure out a way to scale it. You have to figure out a way to scale it so that it goes above 75,000, so you can get to, again, maybe 750,000. You're gonna have to do a whole bunch of different things, and you probably can't do it manually the same way you did it last year. So the whole point being, I'm just giving an example here. Maybe you could try to find more of those $25,000 clients. Maybe you could raise that price of 25,000 to 100,000 or 250,000 or 50,000 and get a bunch more of those clients. Now those you can add up over the course of a year. But if you made a whole bunch of $10 sales, you just made a whole bunch of them hand to hand by going to, going to flea markets. But you probably can't do that over the course of a year. You don't have enough time. Again, you don't have enough energy. You can't be in two places at once. So maybe that means you need to hire staff. Maybe that means you need to print some more books. Maybe you need to run more advertisements. Maybe you need to sell some books in bulk. Maybe that'll help you make more sales. What is it that you can do that will allow you to multiply this result, giving, again, that you can't just do more of what you are already doing? So these are all questions that you got to ask yourself when it comes to raising the floor. And again, I'm just using these as rough examples. The point being, to raise the floor, you got to ask yourself some really tough questions that will require you to throw away what you were doing before, a bunch of what you were doing before, and only hold on to a few of the things that you can now do. That's the way that the game works, and that's what raising the floor is about. And all raising the floor is about, folks, is about standards. It's about standards, it's about baselines, it's about what is acceptable versus what is not, and it's about what you're willing to throw away in order to get to that higher level versus what you can keep. It's not about what you're willing to keep, it's about what you can keep. Because if you're gonna raise the floor, let's say that 10x level, since we're using that number, you can't possibly just do more of the same stuff. It's impossible. It's tangibly impossible for you to do that. So what are you going to throw away? What are you going to keep in order to raise that floor? Now, even as I'm talking about this sounds relatively simple. I mean, mathematically, logically, any of you who has a baseline level of intelligence, you understand that this, okay, that makes sense. You know what? That's right. That is exactly what I had to do. Here's the challenge with this. Because in the book, 10x is easier than 2x. If you haven't read it, again, read it, you'll see. Going to that 10x level, and I have experience in some of these things that I'm talking to you about, is actually less work. It takes less time. It takes less effort. It is less work. There's less hand-to-hand activity, manual activity that you have to do when you're producing the higher level returns than when you're producing the smaller level returns. So why would that be harder? The reason why it's harder is because us human beings, we are creatures of habit, and we become emotionally connected to our habits. We become emotionally connected to doing the stuff that we've always done and doing it in the same way that we've always done it. So in order to do less of a thing, in order to get more of a result, the first thing that we had to do, the most important thing we had to do, is get over mentally and emotionally the habit of doing the stuff that got us to where we're at. So the stuff that got you to 100,000, you are mentally and emotionally connected to it in some way because you built habits around those activities. You have to divorce yourself from those mental and emotional connections, 80% of them, in order to keep the 20% that actually produces the result. And you got to divorce yourself mentally and emotionally from all the effort that went into doing all that stuff, and accept doing less effort but of specific things that actually produce a higher return on investment, which actually take less time, less effort, less manual work, less grunt work, less grind, but produce more of a result. You have to be willing to do that. And if you're not willing to do that, then what you're going to do is keep yourself emotionally and mentally attached to what you've been doing, and that's going to keep you in the same spot. The reason many people can't execute the 10x over 2x is not because they can't do a thing. It's not because they don't have an ability. It's simply because they can't divorce themselves from the activities that got them to where they're at, and only keep the few that will get them to the next level of where they actually want to go. That's the mental challenge. That's the mental hurdle that they need to get over. And at the same time, you have this thing that I call the void. I did a whole episode on my masterclass about the void. I believe it was, let me not lie and try to tell you what number it was. I got too many episodes. But it's called The Void. If you look up my name and type in THE Void, VOID, you'll see the episode. In that episode, I talk about when you are letting go of your past self and moving into your new self, there is a period of time in between when you're no longer your past self, but you haven't yet fully stepped into your new self, and there's an empty space there. There's a no man's land in between where you're like a man or a woman without a country for a period of time. And in that period, the emotional and mental dysregulation that you feel because you're no longer in any space, you're kind of in the middle of nowhere for a period of time. During that period, what happens is a lot of people go back to who they were because at least they feel like they belong somewhere. Many people cannot deal with the emotional challenge and the mental challenge of being in a space where you're not established anywhere yet. You're not established at the highest level yet, but you don't want to be back at the lower level. And that discomfort, most people can't deal with it. Dealing with that discomfort is the real mental challenge that really needs to be addressed. And that's the real thing that people need to learn to navigate in order to go to this 10x level. That's the most important part. And it just so happens inside of Work on Your Game University, we have a program called Bulletproof Mindset where I coach people specifically on this thing, getting themselves mentally over those hurdles and preparing yourself ahead of time before they even happen so that they don't throw you off the way that they throw most people off. So the place you go to get access to that and to get access to me as a coach and all of our other trainings and tactical and strategic stuff around mindset, strategy, systems, accountability for performance, go to workonyourgameuniversity.com. That link's down below in the description to this video. If you like what I'm talking about here and you want to get more stuff like this for your game, for your performance, for your results, workonyourgameuniversity.com. Work on your game. Dre all day.